And indeed, I would like now to give the floor to our first speaker. And again, I'm very grateful, Professor Siobhán, that you are with us, because you are an expert, and as a special rapporteur of the UN, I'm pretty sure you will tell us quite interesting considerations. Now, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of this webinar series and to contribute to your work and to hear about the work of colleagues also. And I'd like also just to highlight the opportunities that there may be to engage with the work of the Special Rapporteur on Trafficking in Persons with my mandate, and perhaps to see what opportunities there might be for my mandate to support your work, whatever part of the world you're in. And I'll say a little bit about how the mandate works and how we can hope to support the work of civil society, of human rights defenders, of victims and survivors in engaging with states or in bringing to our attention individual violations or violations against groups of people, or to look at particular policy issues or failures of policy or legislation or ongoing cases. Because I am quite conscious that my mandate as Special Rapporteur on Trafficking in Persons, it is a global mandate. We have a small office, but the key thing is to work in partnership with organisations and civil society in different parts of the world. And hopefully we can leverage the work of the mandate to engage with states and to support individuals at risk or who have already experienced ongoing human rights violations. Just to note, a key thematic priority for my work is looking at the intersection of trafficking and migration, and in particular to highlight the situation of people in precarious migration statuses, who may be in an irregular migration situation, who may be forcibly returned, who may be seeking asylum, but also a victim of trafficking. So to look at a range of contexts where people may be particularly at risk of exploitation, including trafficking and re-trafficking. In my reports to date to the Human Rights Council and to the UN General Assembly, I have repeatedly highlighted the importance of expanding safe and regular migration pathways, including through implementation of the commitments already made in the Global Compact on Migration in Objective 10, which commits states to eradicating trafficking in persons, including by expanding safe migration and providing long-term social protection to victims of trafficking. So a key thing, I think, the first thing that I would like to note is that we have all of the tools. We have the legal tools, we have the policy frameworks, we have international human rights instruments, we have global compacts on refugees and migrants. The commitments in the paper is there. The standards are there. The gaps are in implementation. And when we talk about the migration crisis and the refugee crisis, I think we need to be very clear that what we are experiencing is a crisis of policy and a crisis of protection, and mostly a crisis of political will to make changes and to end the situation where we see, since 2014, almost 23,000 people missing, lost on the Mediterranean, and many more on other seas and on other risky journeys. The Global Compact in Migration Objective 10 has been part of the discussions in all of the regional reviews on the Global Compact in Migration, which I have participated in as Special Rapporteur on Trafficking, to try to continually highlight these links and the commitments that states have made. And a key thing also is to link over with the broader humanitarian and protection sector and the Global Compact on refugees and the refugee response framework. And here again to highlight the tools that are there and that have been used in the past to expand refugee resettlement quotas, to expand humanitarian visas and the issuing of humanitarian visas, to expand family reunification and to support and provide resources to that, to prevent people from being pushed into situations where they are taking dangerous journeys, put in situations of risk and at risk of exploitation. So it's to take those preventive measures which require a political will to change how we think about migration, and then to provide safe ways to move and travel, and to escape persecution, to escape conflict, to escape situations of forced displacement. I've been working with, as Andrea knows, with the Global Protection Cluster to try to break down these silos in which we sometimes work, UN agencies, UN bodies, UN special procedures, civil society, between development, humanitarian action, peace and security, and to ensure that questions around safe migration and combating trafficking are at the heart of all of those conversations and programming and implementation on the ground. In terms of the priorities that I have presented in my reports to the Human Rights Council and the General Assembly, for victims of trafficking to break the cycle of trafficking and re-trafficking, it's key to provide long-term social protection, not short-term conditional assistance, not short-term residence permits that come to an end and push people into a situation of precarity, but long-term social protection, unconditional, and that allows people time to recover and to build new opportunities for employment, integration in host countries. I've emphasised the importance of the non-punishment principle, which was the core of my report to the Human Rights Council in June, and which has also been restated in a general statement yesterday from the International Coordination Group of all agencies within the UN working to combat trafficking, to ensure that victims of trafficking are not punished for unlawful acts that are a direct consequence of being trafficked. So rather than detaining and punishing victims of trafficking, that we provide them with protection, identify them as victims, and seek to combat impunity for trafficking that is ongoing. I think it's also critical to continually emphasise the importance of disability inclusion in all of the work that we do on prevention and protection, that we are looking to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, that we recognise a human rights model, that we ensure that the services that we provide, that we call on states to provide, are disability inclusive, and that take account of the targeting of people with disabilities, both physical and intellectual disabilities, by trafficking networks, but also ensuring that all of our prevention and protection actions are disability inclusive and ensure the rights of persons with disabilities. And we need critically to always ensure that we are adopting child-sensitive responses and looking at meeting the standards that are already there. So the Convention on the Rights of the Child has at its core in Article 2 the non-discrimination principle. Yet we see all kinds of exceptions with regard to migrant children, unaccompanied migrant children. We don't see the presumption of childhood operating in practice. We don't see the best interests of the child being implemented for migrant children. We don't see migrant children being mainstreamed into ordinary child protection systems, and we are not seeing sufficient resourcing of child protection. We see continually forced labour and trafficking of children within the agriculture sector, within the fisheries sector, within domestic work. And we have the tools to combat that. So we really now need to be looking at mandatory human rights due diligence that sanctions companies, businesses and states that fail to ensure that children are protected against trafficking for all forms of exploitation. And the gender dimension, we know that labour exploitation is often combined with sexual exploitation. We need to ensure that we have a gender-sensitive lens, that we are recognising the extent to which women and girls are targeted, and also that men and boys may be victims of trafficking for sexual exploitation and may experience additional barriers to disclosing and sharing that information and reporting it. So being attentive to the gender specificity of trafficking in all of its dimensions. That's all I have to say for now. I'm going to put in the chat, hopefully, a link. I am keen that civil society and human rights defenders and organisations working with migrants in different parts of the world would engage with my office. If you send information on an ongoing situation of human rights violations relating to trafficking, we can respond, we can engage with the state. If there is a problem in relation to legislation that is pending or a policy development that is damaging or harmful, if there are individuals that have gone missing and there's no investigation or follow-up, if protection is not being provided, as I said, we can issue communications and engage with states. So to give a recent example of that, just 2 weeks ago, my office, with a number of other special rapporteurs supporting me, wrote directly to Saudi Arabia and to Vietnam in relation to migrant domestic workers, victims of trafficking. One, unfortunately, a young woman, a child who died while being forcibly returned, but others who were in situations of being physically abused, denied their rights as workers, and detained in some instances. And we have highlighted that and are engaging directly with the states following information that was submitted. And it's really important to note that all of that, the names of the victims, the organisations contacting us, can remain confidential. So all steps are taken to ensure the safety of those engaging with us. But we do, because we are limited in our capacity, we really need to work in partnership with those on the ground, and to try to effect change in that way. So I would strongly encourage you to engage with the office and to see how we can be of assistance and to work with you. Thank you. Over.
Thank you very much, Professor Mullally. Indeed, many thanks for this very interesting substantive contribution, and also for your continuing work as special rapporteur. And also, I think many people have heard your opening to working together, to cooperation with civil society, and definitely I'm pretty sure it will be forwarded, and you will be having positive answers out of this proposal. Professor Mullally, would you like to add something to what Monsignor Vitillo said?
No, thank you. I think the points are very strongly made, including particular sectors where people are placed in situations of risk because there are increased opportunities for exploitation. There's limited oversight, limited enforcement of labour protections, lack of access to information, and often isolation in those settings, in fisheries and in domestic work, in agriculture. But we have the potential to prevent that happen. We have the possibility, we have the policies and programmes, but it is the political will for implementation that we need to address and ensure access to protection for people at risk, but also critically to try to prevent that happening in the first place. So why are domestic workers more at risk of exploitation? Because we don't value that work. We're not monitoring what's happening in terms of labour standards because of the gendered nature of discrimination and misogyny that leads to that situation in the first place. So we need to look at all of those together and ensure enhanced rights for people who are in situations of displacement and migration. As Andrea had said also, both regular migrants and migrants in irregular situation can be exploited, and that reflects greed and a failure to monitor those sectors also, I think. Thank you.
And Professor Mullally, if I may give you the last opportunity to speak, and I would be very happy to hear how you felt during this webinar and what kind of final proposals you could have for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, immediately continuing that point on internally displaced persons, IDPs, just to flag as well, I'm sure Andrea would have wanted to mention as well the Guide to Anti-Trafficking Action in Internal Displacement Contexts, published by the Global Protection Cluster, which is a really useful guide in ensuring that protection clusters, humanitarian actors, all those in those settings are aware of the risks of trafficking and know how to respond, to take effective preventive action, but also to report and ensure that there are channels for referral for protection. So I think that was really important, that point to think about people who are forcibly displaced, who are internally displaced, and the particular risks, because they are often the targets of traffickers. They're very much at risk of exploitation given the change that comes with poverty and displacement and that crisis setting. And linked to that, I think we also need to reflect on other drivers of displacement, including the climate crisis and climate change. Just coming out of COP26, we've heard a lot of discussion around forced displacement and some discussion also on how it links into heightened risks of trafficking in persons, and also how those sectors where we see trafficking occurring are also often those that are contributing to the climate crisis. But people increasingly becoming displaced because of the climate emergency and the heightened risks that they are facing, that we need to address that and recognise the importance of responding to this crisis now to prevent further trafficking in persons. I want to come back to what many of you commented on, and Father Musi is gone as well, but the role of civil society and human rights defenders. And in many parts of the world, we see shrinking civil society space and criminalisation of humanitarian actors seeking to assist migrants, including trafficked persons, and that will just increase the risk of loss of life and very serious human rights violations connected to trafficking in persons. So I do think the importance of dialogue was mentioned, and continued dialogue across different sectors, but also with governments and states to take seriously the commitments that they're making on paper, including next week as we review the Global Plan of Action on Trafficking. There's a political declaration that will come with that has strong commitments, including to the non-punishment principle, to child-sensitive responses, to combating gender inequality as a driver of migration. But we need to see how those can be implemented on the ground, and really take seriously those commitments to expanding safe pathways to migration as one way of preventing trafficking, and also looking at the commitments to refugee resettlement, humanitarian visas, as I said, family reunification, rather than pushing people into the hands of traffickers. And then we do need to take on the difficult tasks of challenging corruption, state-sponsored trafficking, and the continuing impunity gaps in law enforcement in terms of addressing and tackling traffickers, rather than seeing what we see are resources being diverted, in fact, to criminalise humanitarian actors, NGOs and civil society. So we have the tools, we have the policy frameworks, we certainly have the legal frameworks. We need to see continued cooperation and persistence in ensuring their implementation on the ground. And it needs to be a human rights focus. We need to ally with disability rights movements, with racial justice movements, to ensure that the protections are afforded without discrimination, without exceptions, to build that political will. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed for this conclusion.